Okay, hello and welcome to another video. Now, I did a video on the Kelvin Timeline Intel Dread a while back for a high DPS build. Now, not a lot of people seem to realise that I'm actually a console player currently. So unfortunately things like using a pass to see what your actual DPS isn't actually possible. I thought I'd better get that out of the way because there's been the occasional comment or private message asking me what my DPS actually is. Well, that's a little bit difficult for me to say because I can't actually tell you. Rather obvious, but anyway. So, just a quick go over of weapons and some of the changes to equipment based on the last build. So, instead of using crit D3 and pen weapons, I'm now using coalitions. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the perfect stats on them all, but they're good enough. Crit D4 and I've got crit D3 damage, and then I've got this terrible one at crit D3 and crit H. But they do the job. They're 14 epic and they're coalition weapons. As another disclaimer, this video is not a budget build. A lot of the things in here cost an awful lot of money, both on PC and console. So, coalition weapons of this quality, or grade, whatever you want to describe it as, would cost a small fortune on console. The Nausicaan 3-piece set, for those who don't know, it's a pretty huge damage buff from having all of this, because for the 3 set you get 26.6 disruptor and a decent amount of hull penetration. I believe that's 5 resistance ignore, because this is the hull penetration skill. It doesn't give you plus 50 ignore armor, and it also gives you an extra 25% disruptor damage for having the console itself. The power transfer rate is also quite nice. Torpedo, to be fair, in my opinion, this is pretty much the best PvE torpedo in the whole game, because it's disruptor for a start, which is nice, so that fits with the rest of the set. It's massively buffable by everything else that you use, both Cat 1 and Cat 2, so yeah, it is just amazing. Plus the set itself is just humongous. The highest crits I've seen with this are around 120k with all buffs on. So it does a serious amount of damage. The Terran Task Force is still pretty much one of the top 5, maybe, strongest weapons in the game. It just does stupid damage when the enemy gets low health. Nausicaan Disruptor, mostly to make the set, to be honest. And I've got the Kinetic Cutting Beam. Now, the Cutting Beam isn't buffable by beam skills, and some people that would be a disadvantage. Another option to having this could potentially be to swap that out for another coalition and run that instead. Personally, I prefer to run the Kinetic Cutting Beam, because when the shields are gone, this does far more damage than anything else will. And when you combine it with the assimilated module, which I would highly recommend using anyway, you get the 2-piece set that basically stops your weapons from losing power when they're firing, for all intents and purposes. I have 4 fleet vulnerability locators. Honestly, the best tactical consoles you can get, so there's no option for change here either. Now, I've changed the set that I'm using a little bit over here, so I'm now using 2-piece Iconian shields, because they're basically the best shields in the game. And I did experiment with using different deflectors, but I always come back to this one. The scientific readiness is okay, but personally I only use 1 science skill, so I don't really benefit from that. But this isn't an elite ready build, so that extra little bit of a heal from the 2-piece set does help. It's not huge, but it's a nice extra little bonus. Plus the effect is quite strong anyway. I've using the competitive engines because of this effect here. I use the firing mode ability, which does work with torpedo skills as well. So I use fire at will 3 and torpedo spread, so I get 2 times that this is going to activate. And with this being on an A2B build, that means I have this very frequently, which helps turn a fat, slow-moving ship like a dreadnought. So that's why I've got that. It's pretty much just for ease of life. If you wanted to go full ham sandwich for damage, then you'd pretty much want to go with the Romulan advanced impulse engines. Mostly for the weapon amplification, plus they're quite fast engines in general. Elite Fleet Warp Core for the power transfer rate and weapon cost, mostly. Plus mine has AMP on it. Yeah, the Elite Fleet cores honestly are pretty much as good as you are going to get. Apologies for the messages popping up at the top of the screen. Now, Bioneural and Tachyokinetic Converter, these are both Lobby consoles. Yes, I appreciate that for a lot of people that's going to be expensive or unattainable. Again, this is not a budget build. These for your crit chance, along with the simulated module. Then I have a conductive RCS with EPS on it, power transfer rate, since the catastrophic nerf hammer battered the game. EPS is even more important than it used to be. Dynamic power redistributor module, this comes from the prototype Dreadnought. If you are Romulan, this is relatively easy to get hold of, because you can buy this console off the exchange. It comes out of the packs. If you are Federation character, this is much more expensive, because you have to actually buy the ship to get the console. But the heal that it gives you is astronomical. The damage bonus is just huge. Not to mention that it's quite nice in itself. A little bit of extra energy damage and a little bit of res all. And then I'm using the point defense bombardment warhead. Projectile damage just to boost up my Nausicaa a tiny bit more, and 1% crit chance, because why the hell not? From having a 2-piece set of this, there's an extra 33% disruptor damage. So in terms of actually buffing your disruptor, there's not really much more that you can possibly get to increase your damage. Could maybe take this out, but personally I'd rather have my weapon power at the maximum it can possibly be permanently, rather than it dip down a tiny bit. So that's that. In terms of skills, I've changed the skills over a tiny little bit. Still running Ox to Bat, or A2B. Only I'm running emergency powder engines, because this ship is slow. Emergency powder weapons, I'll show you why it's very important we use that in a little minute. Tac team, essential, hazmat. For the most part, it's pretty much basic stuff. The main crux of a tactical based build nowadays is your tac team, an attack pattern of some sort, either Delta or Beta, fire at will 3, Kema sight, and then if you're using a torpedo, use a spread. If not, beam overload can be a pretty decent option, because that was buffed recently. So during the off time, if you fire at will, you can be using that instead, and then you get a 40% crit severity and bonus damage till you beam attacks for a little while. So that's another option if you want to go with full beams. Wouldn't recommend it, but it is another option. Energy Team 3 for heals. Again, this is a elite base build, so heals are quite important. Then I have Override Subsystems 3 and Reverse Shield Polarity. RSP kind of speaks for itself, and OSS, just humongous power levels, is always good. Now this is the part where it gets a little bit more expensive. So, Starship traits, emergency weapon cycle. This is pretty much essential for most elite builds. One of the best Starship traits in the game, to be honest. Firing cycle haste is awesome, and the minus 50% weapon power cost. You combine that with everything else that I've got, and you literally just have max possible weapon power all the time. Improved pedal to the metal. Kind of speaks for itself. It's a plus 20% all damage boost. It does make a huge difference. Delta Prime, partly because I'm not a Romulan, not to mention it's just an awesome trait, but this can be extremely expensive. I think on console now it's gone back up to well over 100 mil. Spoils of the Victor. This comes from the Taduri Raider. It's the Nicole Raider. I'm using this for heals because virtually every other item on my ship and every skill is based for damage and nothing else. So I need something to keep myself alive. So I have Spoils of the Victor and Subspace Reinforcements. This comes from a Lobby ship, the Alachi Ornash. These give you hazard emitters and extend shields. They're just nice pets that actually support you instead of trying to attack something else. So these two together, personally, for the vast majority of Elite content is enough. If you were to go and do something like a Hive Elite and you needed to make sure that you could be taken down in one shot, I'd recommend swapping out either of these two and put Invincible in its place. And Invincible comes from the Zal, which is another Lobby ship. Now, for personal space traits, pretty much everything here is damage focused again. So Operative, Crit Chance and Severity. Beam Barrage, this comes from 15 in the Beam Crafting skill. Fluidic Cocoon, you can buy this off the exchange. It's an extra potentially 15% bonus energy damage. Superior Beam Training. Helmsman, this is a personal preference for me. Ease of life more than anything. The reduced cooldown to evasive maneuvers is most of the reason why I have this. Fleet Coordinator for in team. Superior Projectile, because my Nausicaan does humongous damage. Self-modulating fire. Now, this is only a 10-second out of every 45, so albeit less than a quarter uptime, when this does kick in, it's just carnage. Inspirational Leader, just to have a little bit of everything. And Good Day to Die, because I'm a tactical captain. And this for tactical captains is pretty much mandatory. Now, something not many people look at is the space reputation traits. So Crit Chance, Severity, these pretty much go without saying. Automated Protomatter Conduits, these are a pretty nice shield and hull heal, and considering it's a near enough 50% uptime, I find this to be extremely effective. Enhanced armor penetration and shield penetration, just to squeeze out that little bit extra damage. If you're fighting in Elite, really you shouldn't have that. You should have tactical advantage. I don't know why the other one was on. Have this because even when they're at lower health, sometimes you could do with that little bit extra armor pen just to punch through and smash them into a million pieces. In terms of space skills, mine unfortunately is not the best build for PvE at all. In fact, mine's designed for a particular kind of PvP build. But your essential things to make sure that you have is your weapon amplification, so your crit chance, crit severity, your energy weapon training at the very least, preferably projectile as well, and then I would recommend at least advanced hull penetration, shield penetration as well if you're going for a more tactical heavy build, and targeting sensors or long range targeting sensors, because these reduce the damage penalty from being further away drastically. Get this. Basically, I have the hull plating, which is basically an extra neutronium. The only reason we'll start using this is because of the fleet buff nerf. EPS, as I stated before, very important, and turn rate if you're using a big heavy ship. If you only ever fly escorts, maybe you don't need 2 points in this, you could get away with 1. Personally, I fly Blof, so I need 2 points in this at least. Now that that's all the stats and stuff covered, the game options are set to Elite, just checking. I'm going to show you a little patrol. Unfortunately, at the time that I'm recording this, getting a Elite queue is just not going to happen because everybody's asleep. go in here and show you how it fares. Those of you who are PC players are getting confused, like what the hell is he doing? This is just a system of how you have to activate your skills on console. It's actually really annoying because you can't do anything else while you're doing it. Significant disadvantage to be able to run good old keybinds and macros. Still, I must say, flying your ship is a little bit easier though. Or at the very least more convenient. And to those of you who are going to say, oh, why are you using go down fighting now? It's because these can't actually do enough damage to me to get me down to low health. So, using go down fighting now is a good idea. Apologies if it's a little difficult to see the numbers on screen, but for the most part you should be able to see them. Let's see if we can get a good hit on these. So, around 50k with a torpedo, but there were some shields left on that enemy. It could be a little bit higher. Let's move on to the next group. One downside, acetone simulators aren't the easiest thing to take care of, because even though I have a torpedo, it's an energy-based torpedo, so the acetone assimilator is still immune to it. It's quite annoying. I don't know if you noticed that. It's a 35k beam hit. It's not bad. Season 13 anyway. Second to last group this. Last group. Can't have our buffs up. Damn it. You can see the problem that one has on the console trying to get a skill down that you actually have to target an enemy for. Basically have to stop and apply it to them. It's not quite that bad, but when you're moving fast it can be really annoying. And there's that. Not sure what the time was. Not necessarily the best time, partly due to shoddy piloting. But hopefully that should give you a good idea of what this build is capable of. Honestly, especially if you're a console player, squeezing out more damage than this would be extremely difficult. So my torpedo, and this is in stage stats, so if you say in ESD or whatever and not in sector space, so these are the base stats before actually start applying buffs. So 12.5k on that and 1.5k on the coalitions is just huge amounts of damage. Unfortunately I've got about 50 seconds before we can show you fully buffed. but my crit chance with this is 24.9, 127 critical severity. Part of that crit chance and severity comes from 2 Romulan bridge officers. So you can see here at the bottom they say Superior Romulan Operative plus crit and crit severity. If you're a Romulan, you can pick these up from, well, virtually everywhere and fill your ship full of 5 of them. For me personally, I like to have a lot of power levels, so I have 3 efficient bridge officers. At some point I'll change them out for something else, but for now they work, so I see no reason to change them just at the minute. My buff's ready yet? Yeah, buff's ready. That doesn't actually apply anything to the in-game stats, so I'm not going to bother with that too much. Let's just pop on some abilities. Okay, so fully buffed, 22.5, nearly 3k damage on these, over 3k, and the crit severity is okay. It goes well over 200 with Delta Prime, but you need to be attacked in order to do that. So unfortunately I can't show you that. I just can't show you the hull either. So when you start a battle with this particular build using Delta Prime, you have to use threatening stance all the time, just to make sure that you're pulling aggro off everything, because you want those Delta Prime stacks, so the crit chance and severity for as much as you can possibly have them on. And if you don't have threatening stance, it can be a little difficult to get the stacks, because sometimes if you've got somebody of a similar or equal power to you, they might take aggro off. So run threatening stance just to make sure you get those stacks applied to you, and then yeah, amazing crit chance and weights. It's just over 40% crit chance when everything is up, 230 something crit severity, and obviously you've seen the base damage of the weapons. It's crazy. It's an awesome build, admittedly very expensive, but well worth it. Something to work for. And that is pretty much it from me, except for one thing. If you're flying a big heavy ship and you have a problem with turning, these engines will pretty much solve that problem for you. If you're an engineer based captain, well, if you are an engineering captain, you have another option, which is, nope, not them ones. Not them ones. Okay, so the third one's down. These ones here, the fortified impulse engines. What these do is, upon activating heal shield bridge officer abilities, odds are you're going to have quite a few of those if you're an engineer. Possibly not, but you might, and if you do, this could be another option for you. Personally, although I do have a couple of heals, I do find it more convenient to have it on my tactical abilities. For instance, when my torpedo spray is ready, when I pop that, I know I'm going to have the turn rate I need to get round to my front arc before I come back to broadside an enemy again. So it's just more convenient for me, but again, that's kind of a personal preference thing. So yeah, if you're running a heavy ship, give it a try. You might find that the ease of life is worth investing in one of these kinds of engines. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I hope it's been helpful to at least somebody. Take care.